Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, coming to you with TJ Mathewson, Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host. Following Oregon State's win over California, we'll also be previewing this weekend's matchup against UCLA as the 5-1 and 15th ranked Beavers will take on the 18th ranked UCLA Bruins and old Chip Kelly at Reser Stadium. TJ, good to be talking with you, man. It's been a little bit since we chit-chatted. Went on a little excursion, a little trip, and but back now and excited to chit-chat with you about some football this week, man.
And another exciting week of football before the bye week. I'm really looking forward to this Saturday's matchup against UCLA. By the way, hope you had fun in Mexico. Always a fun time getting to go to an all-inclusive resort and just do nothing. It's healing.
Yeah, it was, shout out to my sister and my now brother-in-law for picking a really good place for a kind of wedding reception of sorts. It was definitely a dream come true for her. And, I'm going to start shedding a tear again here like my brother's speech at the wedding, but definitely a proud moment for this older brother for sure. And really fun down there. But nevertheless, got a chance to catch the first half of the game through the air, kind of meandered my way through customs and was able to catch the third quarter on my phone as I'm waiting for the bus back to my car, and then ultimately listen to Doc Parker for the fourth quarter with the most important parts of the matchup, including the two fourth quarter turnovers that we'll talk about a little later here in the podcast. But yeah, TJ, not quite the game we expected going into it. Obviously, like you mentioned, I was off last week, but did a lot of my Cal prep work ahead of time. And that was not the game I predicted. I predicted much more of a defensive battle between Justin Wilcox, who I think is a solid defensive mind in this conference, and Jonathan Smith and Trent Bray, who, I figured would kind of build on that great defensive matchup we saw against Utah the week prior. So throwing all that out the window, I'm curious just kind of what your initial thoughts were from the game. Obviously, the first thing that stands out to me when I was able to watch it from start to finish, DJU's best game by far. He cooked at certain points in that game. The receiving core looked a lot better, able to finally make some explosive plays. And then Jack Velling just showing up and looking like a dude with three touchdowns, excuse me. So all that to say, I like what I saw heading into this matchup with the Bruins, but very weird game and not one I would have expected. 52-40 with that final. Did you see that one coming?
I thought there was a chance DJ would have a good game. You look at some of the peripherals of Cal's defense before the game, and I'm like, well, surely it can't actually be this bad. But in pass defense so far this season, Cal ranked outside the top 100 in pass defense nationally. Those numbers can be skewed, especially when you give up 59 points on the road to Washington. So I'm like, okay, well, it might not happen, but there's the potential for it to happen. But then hearing DJ and his quick radio hit after the game on the Beaver Sports Network, and hearing his energy and his confidence, it explained everything of why I did. Did you hear it, by the way? I think Ron Callen tweeted it out. And so he was much more fired up, much more energetic than he was in his normal media scrum after the game. He had come down emotionally a little bit and was more composed and more like his normal self. But Ron gets his interview first outside the Beaver locker room, and DJ's like, man, I think his quote was, yeah, I was turned up out there, like I was fired up, having a good time with my guys. Yeah. I knew pregame, like, man, I'm about to have a game today. And again, that's some of the most emotion we've seen out of him yet. And it just sees how much that confidence for him gets him going and gets this Oregon State offense going as well. It could have very easily turned into a Washington State situation. It wasn't the Beaver defense in the first couple of drives blowing assignments and having wide open guys streaking down the field for all of a sudden Oregon State having to chase 14 points. But the Beavers go up 14-3, and they make a couple of really, really, really bad mistakes, onside kick and fumble, and all of a sudden Cal is leading that game. And it could have been so easy for the pressure to get to DJ in this offense, and they churn their wheels a little bit, don't produce in the second quarter. Cal goes into the halftime with the lead, and then they can hold the Beavers at arm's length away. But no, the Beaver offense was the one that jumped back ahead and then kept Cal at arm's length throughout the rest of that football game. And especially some of those throws he had to make on third down to Anthony Gould, or the two touchdowns they had to score on fourth down just to keep Cal away maybe in a different scenario, you kick field goals there, but you realize with what that Cal offense was doing, you had to have those 2 4th downs inside the red zone to go score touchdowns. And that's
Sure.
exactly what they did. It was such a promising sign for this offense. Can I promise they're going to pass this week? Absolutely not. Man, this UCLA defense is absurdly good. D'Anton Lynn, who is the son of Anthony Lynn, didn't know that until this week. But
Interesting.
his I think they're paying him over $1 million too, from what I heard. And they bring him in from the NFL, and he has turned this UCLA defense around. I see this game very much as a similarity to the Utah game this week. But let's stick to the Cal game here for a second before I go off on a tangent. Man, was I impressed with that offensive performance and the defensive performance for the second time on the road in Pac-12 play this season. A little disappointing. I'm not even sure where to start with that defense.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think, we obviously will, but like you said, the fact that the defense hasn't translated to the 2 Pac-12 road games, I think is particularly telling, at least early on. Good news for this weekend because Oregon State will be back in the friendly confines of Reser Stadium. They then get a bye week, which, for this year, this team, I think it comes at a pretty good spot. Then you go on the road for a couple more games. So I think it'll be a good spot to kind of, readjust things, so to speak, because like you said, going back to the offense before we dive a little further into the defense, I really thought, watching that game, DJ was in the most control, and you look kind of at the more advanced analytics numbers. It's his best game since San Jose State, and even more impressive because I think it's a much better opponent in Cal. And I think, and I kind of wrote about it going into it. Cal is a team that's not terrible. And I don't mean to say that negatively towards the Bears, but like Auburn went toe to toe with Georgia not too long ago. Georgia ended up winning that game, but for a while there was a little scare from Auburn. Cal had Auburn on the ropes in Berkeley and should have won that game. I understand that everyone saw, Idaho was up on Cal and then just kind of immediately dismissed Cal as like a team that wasn't going to be able to make any threats this year. And I don't think that's the case. I think the Bears will get some teams, and I think they're going to be pushing for bowl eligibility for sure. So certainly a game that Oregon State got tested more so than we thought maybe they should be, but still easier to correct after a win than a loss. And, the running game was what I think it's going to be. I mean, obviously, Damian Martinez, Deshaun Fenwick, neither one of them crack 100 yards, but still pretty efficient on the ground, over 5 yards a carry for both. But as you mentioned, it was the plays of the receivers that really stood out to me in this game. Anthony Gould, 7 receptions for 117 yards. Have yourself a game, Mr. Gould. I mean, I think to the catch that he made diving like this, I mean, Jonathan Smith highlighted the 2 third-down catches. I mean, he made play after play after play, and the Beavers needed them all, TJ.
Yeah, and to think this came the week after, I mean, a lot of people were like, well, is there like a true wide receiver one on this Beaver roster? And then Silas Bolden goes out and has the game he does against that Utah defense, and all the attention is on Silas. I wrote an article about Silas, like, man, what a playmaker this guy has become. Look at all the different ways they're getting him the ball. And then all of a sudden, Anthony Gould comes along and is making the biggest catches of the game, goes over 100 yards for the first time this season. And we talked to him this week, and go check it out on our YouTube channel at BeaversEdge on YouTube, or you can check it out on the Day of Board or wherever you want to get those videos. But you hear Anthony Gould saying, I asked him, do you get surprised when you make some of these catches? Are you like kind of amazed at yourself sometimes? He's like, no, I'm just expecting to catch all these balls. We're playmakers. Yeah. We got to make plays. And that's exactly what him and Silas Bolden have done a masterful job of doing. And to complement, when their quarterback is on and those 2 receivers are on, this Beaver offense is really, really, really difficult to stop. A couple other notes from this game.
Yes.
First of all, got to see some of the depth on the offensive line. Didn't see too much of a dip. Tali Fuaga, I think, is questionable, I think, for this weekend.
We'll see. With a bye week, with a bye week on the horizon, if he's anywhere close to doubtful, I would imagine they would hold him, especially with Grant Stark being available to kind of be a plug-and-play guy there. Good news was Jake Levengood came back, and they didn't really have any big injuries coming out of that game, which that's always a key sign. And we'll also get into Jaden Robinson and Ryan Cooper Jr., who also didn't play in that game. And Coop, I would expect to play this weekend. Robinson with that hamstring, it's a little more iffy in my opinion. I again, kind of like going back to what we talked about with Utah a couple weeks ago, TJ, how we're like, if any of their guys were close, even Cam Rising, who still hasn't played, that we would have expected them to wait, a week because they're their bye week. That's an interesting kind of dynamic that they have here. Obviously, you want to always have your playmakers back, but if, a guy isn't quite ready, the benefit of having that extra week's rest is certainly helpful.
It is. They did both warm up against Cal. I think Coop was a little closer to playing the way they worded it, but both technically went through portions of warm up. So we can't rule them out.
No, not at all.
We can't rule them out for UCLA. They did go through. They went through the process of putting pads on, which is a big step. Secondly, we saw Aiden Childs again.
Yeah,
which was curious, especially in a game like this where DJ is just on fire. It just was cooking, and they still decided that it was the best thing for them to put Childs in the game. Now, Childs got to work with a short field. Silas Bolden had a great return, and Childs walked down and threw a great touchdown pass on third down into the corner for Silas Bolden. I think he went through multiple reads on that play to get Silas open. So
very corner of the end zone,
Positive to see. This point was brought up to me on the post-game show, though, of what happens, in a situation where Childs enters and he makes a crucial game-changing mistake, potentially. He's a freshman. It could absolutely happen.
Sure.
And now DJ, who just got yanked out of the game and lost, I guess, whatever rhythm he had, potentially, into the game, and the Beavers don't recover from that. It could come back to bite them, especially if Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren think, we want to get Childs a series against UCLA with a backup tackle. Okay, well, you did against Utah. Childs made one nice run and took two horrible sacks. Didn't play again against Utah. So do you want to do that again this week? It's an interesting decision for the coaching staff.
Yeah, they've certainly have established that we really want to get him a drive a game these last couple weeks. And, that kind of takes me back to when DJ was struggling a couple weeks ago and it got mentioned. And Jonathan's like, Childs will get out there. And I also think it's to continue to, for lack of better terms, TJ, making him feel important in today's Uber transfer, especially with all the external factors going on with Oregon State specifically right now. And, to be perfectly honest, TJ and I could almost have a podcast just updating you guys on how, the inner workings of the Pac-12 courts are fighting it out on behalf of Oregon State and Washington State. So that's going to be interesting to see how that whole thing ultimately shakes itself and flushes itself out, because TJ, it's getting, I put a note on the damn board this week. I threw up a gif of Harvey Specter and said, the Beavers are if the Beavers are going to need this guy on their side, because
it is getting the big guns.
It is getting really legal. And again, don't want to go off on a tangent, but just back to Aiden Childs. I just think the Beavers are conscious about making him feel valued and important. Yeah. And if he's a part of the game plan each week, you're not going to feel like you're falling out. Meanwhile, again, I think barring anything crazy, I doubt we're going to see much of Ben Branson, if any, this year, because I think we've kind of seen that Childs is officially that number 2, and not like that was really a question, but just, if there are any quarterback reps behind DJ, we know where they're going to go. And with you on that, again, I think he played something like 4 or 5 snaps, so it wasn't really all that much for Aiden Childs, but when he did, that play where he finds Silas Bolden and goes through his reads and finds him just in the corner of that end zone, very impressive play from the youngster. And again, not like Cal's the most hostile environment, but from what I could tell on TV, it looked like there was a decent crowd there. So, nevertheless, still an environment for a young freshman. That's enough on the offense, TJ. I think we kind of covered it. Got to give Jack Velling his props too. A 3-tutty hat trick. You were obviously doing some board updates for us. Did you think he was just going to have a fantasy explosion kind of a day, TJ?
Well, if you're speaking of fantasy, Brenden, no, I did not pick up Jack Velling. I did not see this coming in the future. But, it's got to be something you're really excited about. People have raved about the talent of this tight end room for a couple years now, especially with Luke Musgrave.
100%.
You realize, Brenden, that Jack Velling passed Luke Musgrave's career touchdown total at Oregon State just on Saturday night.
Yeah, that didn't surprise me because Luke Musgrave, as great as he was that guy who I said forever, just because of circumstance, injuries, quarterback play, go watch him be a better pro player than he was a college player. Luke Musgrave, in my opinion, other than those two games that we saw against Boise State and Fresno State, where he was a number one and Chance Nolan looked nowhere else but him, and it didn't matter because he was 6'6" and could run like a gazelle. Other than that, it was a lot of potential from Luke Musgrave, and I think we're seeing it now, right? I mean, he's probably, the most comfortable rookie I've seen from an Oregon State player in some time, and, fits like a glove. So, all that to say, that doesn't really surprise me because Musgrave's stats were always a little less than what I thought they could have been for a variety of reasons. But all that's to say, the tight end position I think is great for Oregon State. I think Jack Belling is going to do good things this year, and he's got room to grow. And then we'd be remiss, TJ, we didn't mention quickly on offense the Isaac Hodgins package that is ever growing. And I'll just say this: shout out to that kid. He's been through so much in his career, been here for a long time, and it was great to see him get worked in. And it's not like a what do you call it? Like the Beavers just trying to do something nice for a senior. He's earned that playing time, and he's blocking pretty well at fullback.
Yeah. He's the fullback, right? Like that's his role now. He's
100%.
not exactly Jack Coletto. He chuckled this week when someone was asking him, "So are you going to get some of those Jack Coletto direct snap touches?" He was like, "I don't know if I've earned that yet." But all the blocking, I mean, he says he really loves the opportunity to get out there and really run,
Absolutely.
which is just part of the position. It makes sense. Defensive lineman, especially. I mean, you're just running into somebody. You're not running upfield. And he smile on his face, seemed like he was having the best time. And they can dial up those plays for him. No one's covering the fullback out of the backfield. Yeah. And it's quite a way for a fifth touchdown pass. I'll say that.
Yes, absolutely. And again, kudos to him. It's going to be fun to watch that role grow. Quickly moving over to the defense, let's get our gripes out on the defense before we switch gears and move on over to the Bruins and Chip Kelly and company. TJ, a couple questions for you right off the bat, because for me, where this game starts and finishes, watching it on tape again, I don't know if it was really anything stood out to me more. And again, the Pro Football Focus numbers 100% backed it up. TJ, arguably the worst tackling game in Jonathan Smith's tenure, and perhaps the worst tackling game since PFF began recording data for Oregon State back in, I think, 2014. Like, it was bad. And when I look back at it, it's like, I don't know if Oregon State was necessarily bad defensively, like I thought that you mentioned it earlier, like I thought that they were against Washington State. Like early in that game against Washington State, just playing out bad, right? You're missing coverages. You're this. Against Cal, it really just seemed like it was the broken tackles of Afonso, not even Jaden Ott. Coming into this game, I thought Jaden Ott would be the guy to kind of really stick it to Oregon State. He still had 85 yards. But Isaiah Afonso, how many times did they miss tackles on that guy, TJ? I mean, he's a little guy, right? Was definitely able to knock off some tackles, but couldn't tackle him. Had some tough times, taking proper angles to receivers on the edges. It just didn't look like a great defensive game until actually, I'm going to rephrase. It was not a great defensive game. The Beavers were able to make a lemonade out of lemons by getting those turnovers. Again, Jermod McCoy coming up with a big turnover, and then Sione Lolohea, obviously, with the fumble recovery. But, I mean, not what I expected, TJ, following that game against Utah. I really thought that defense that we saw against Utah would carry, and perhaps it's because even Cal with Mendoza at quarterback is still better than Utah at quarterback. Home road, whatever you want to break it down, it just seems like that defense did not travel again. What were your kind of thoughts on the defense overall? I mean, did tackling stand out to you the most as well?
Tackling was probably the worst thing. It was also a little bit on Cal's. I would say on Cal's side with the short, quick game to help Mendoza out a little bit, kind of similar to how Washington State runs their offense, just I guess with a little less depth. So when you combine with, I guess, a higher completion percentage and worse tackling, that, kind of checks out. When you go up tempo against this Oregon State defense, the pass rush doesn't really have an effect on the game. you're able to really neutralize it because you're just going so fast. And,
Right.
they're going to face more tempo this week with UCLA to the benefit or detriment of UCLA. I don't know how much more effective UCLA's offense is actually going to be, probably less. But, like, the tempo is really affecting them. I don't know if we got, like, fast. I don't know if we got a great answer this week from any of the defensive players on if the tempo was really hurting them. They said, like, the biggest thing with tempo is making sure they're lined up correctly. And I don't know if being lined up correctly was an issue because we never really thought there were too many blown coverages against Cal. I mean, Cal just operated their offense at a high level, I thought. And combined with the missed tackles of Oregon State and unable to get off the field on a third down. And you think it's some of the other situations too. I mean, Oregon State gives them the ball at the 25-yard line on the onside kick. Then they turn it over. They fumble it on the next drive inside their own territory as well. Both those times, Cal went and scored a touchdown. The Beavers got a stop on a third down, and while Cal was punting away, you got a roughing the kicker penalty that extended a drive and turned into a touchdown as well. That's 21 points of the 40 that you gave up right there. And I think if the coaching staff was looking at it, it's like, hey, we clean up these mistakes. This is a blowout victory, not a nail biter.
Right.
So it depends how you want to look at it. The defense was not good, A. B, the numbers are still skewed a little bit.
Yeah, no, and I think you hit on it there. And, again, that was one of the more puzzling things for me was that onside kick. I mean, I understand, why you attempt a little risk. I mean, that's kind of in Jonathan Smith's character, is kind of be a little more risky here and there, TJ, but man, did it blow up in their face really, really quickly. I mean, they
saw something they liked.
Jonathan said on Monday, he's like, we saw something we liked, but man, that Cal player made I forget who it was that returned, but he made a great play. And then you give them, I think he ran it all the way down to like the 20, 25, something like that.
Yeah. Do you think there'd be as much of an uproar if he didn't return it?
It's a great question. I don't think so. No, because, like when I saw it and, was watching it on TV, I was obviously like, okay, well, it's a little odd, but, Jonathan likes to be aggressive. And I measure same with the fourth down calls and everything else. I just measure all my critiques and my basis for judging this Oregon State football team based on what I know about Jonathan Smith as a coach. And I know that with, Oregon State, he's created this mantra since he's been here. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to play the game aggressively. And maybe that's just kind of how Oregon State has their chip on their shoulder. So, was it a bit odd? Perhaps. And, the return obviously set up a score, but, at the same token, I think Oregon State, it sounded to me anyway, like when we talked to Jonathan on Monday, didn't sound like he's dissuaded. Like if they feel there's an advantage, they're going to run something that could go either way, right?
Yeah, why not? Like, again, I thought all their fourth down decisions in this game were correct. The onside kick was not executed well. I think people would have less of a problem if, there was a scrum at the bottom of the onside kick and Cal happened to come up with the football.
I agree.
I don't think people will be complaining as much. Now, it's like a worst case scenario when the return team merely takes it all the way for a touchdown. That's what you don't want to happen on that. So, yeah, do I think they should have done the onside kick? No, I don't think they really needed to, especially with how they were moving the ball on offense. But they did it anyway. And I think what people want the most is consistency. And Jonathan Smith, throughout all of his calls, has stayed consistent. And hey, look at that. I mean, you how many games have you won the last two seasons now? 15-4? Yeah. Is that right? Yeah, 15-4. I think people will take the aggressiveness if it pays off with a 15-4 record. It is better than being so passive that you hand the ball off in your own territory where the other team has no timeouts. You fumble and the other team drives down and scores with no touchdowns remaining. Just not naming any names, of course. But being consistent in that mantra is
it may be a team with a logo that looks like this, but we'll see. We'll see.
Except actually it looks like this now.
That's true. Never a bad time to take a dig at old Mario down there, and that was quite the decision I saw, obviously, when I came back this week. But last point in this game, TJ, then we need to get to a little UCLA. Were you surprised at how well Cal was able to run the ball? Cal's passing was Cal's passing, in my opinion. But even in Oregon State's loss to Washington State on the road, they still didn't let Nakia Watson do much of anything on the ground. Cam Ward, I think, had a little bit of rushing just off the top of my head, but I don't think it was anything out of control. And it was still like, well, the secondary, was still the work in progress, but the run defense traveled. I look at this, TJ, they allowed 241 rushing yards in this game. That's going to bring down the average quite a bit because I believe going into the game, Beavers were averaging about $120 something. So how does something like that is a part of that? Not having James Rawls and Calvin Hart for the first half is a part of that. The success of just Cal's game plan, because that to me defensively was the biggest step back because the run defense still traveled even in that loss to Washington State and wasn't an area I would have expected to be a bit of concern in this matchup.
Yeah, missing Rawls, missing Calvin Hart, but we've already highlighted the tackling. I mean, that's where most of the missed tackles was, and it was literally on Isaiah Fonse, who did most of the damage on the ground for Cal that game.
Right.
The Beavers were there to tackle him a lot.
Yep.
Very often they were in the hole waiting to tackle him, and he would bounce off and go around whoever tried to tackle him. Like, that's, I think, where it boils down to the most. And I think, they're going to face another team that loves to run the football. Chip Kelly loves running the football. But I think they're going to do a little bit better because they can't, the tackling level won't be acceptable, not the one they put up last week.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we can go ahead and use that as a transition. Now, I think we could talk about that Cal game for a bit longer, but we definitely got to get into, the front. You know what they say, your windshield is big because you're always supposed to be looking front. The rear view small because you don't look in the back. So Oregon State will happily take the win and, definitely be, as TJ mentioned, in his conversations with the guys this week, definitely taking it to getting back out there and, trying to have a better defensive performance against UCLA. And the good news for the Beavers, they play better at home. Say what you will about why, TJ, or, I like to think it's Oregon State fans, it's the familiarity, it's the home field advantage that Reeser is. But if Oregon State shows up and brings the same mental fortitude and game plan that they did against Utah, I really like their chances this weekend. Obviously, as you mentioned, Chip Kelly is the godfather or one of the godfathers of the spread offense, particularly the spread offense with running the football. And, Beaver fans know well, they experienced it when it was quite literally unstoppable. And, Chip Kelly had a perfect record during his time as Oregon's head coach against Oregon State. And, the Beavers obviously got Chip Kelly the last time that the two teams played back in 2019 down in the Rose Bowl. But a lot's changed since then, TJ. That's, crazy enough, DTR was still there for the Bruins. He had been there for about 6, 7, 8 years, but nevertheless, a new quarterback this year and Dante Moore, high-level recruit. Dante Moore was likely going to be playing in Eugene this year if it hadn't been for Bo Nix coming back for his senior year. So, one situation benefits somebody else. And obviously he comes in, not the starter right away, but has taken on the job. And, like any other freshman, I think the benefit for Oregon State in this game is that he's a freshman and is going to be, playing in a road environment. And that's still something he's kind of getting his feet wet with and experience with. If this game was in the Rose Bowl, even for the lack of home field advantage it is, I would, feel a more 50-50 on this. But the fact that it's in Reeser Stadium, Oregon State's going to bring a better defensive game plan without a doubt after, getting torched for that 40 last week. And I think it'll be a good game. I think it will be, within, probably 7 to 10 points. I think I like the Beavers a little bit more than the 3.5 spread has it right now. But for the most part, if, that's kind of my initial thoughts on the matchup. TJ, what are you looking at in this matchup?
Ooh, I'm wondering if the total is going to go over 40. I think it's higher than that.
53.
I 53. Feel like this is going to be. I feel like that's too high. I'm looking at this and it just smells like a Utah match. It smells like the Utah game.
It does.
You're going to be on the other side and you're going to have an inexperienced blue chip quarterback.
Yep.
Who in conference play has struggled. Hello, Nate Johnson, everybody? No, it's Dante Moore. Both have done the same. Dante's a little bit better of a passer, but Dante completed 44% of his passes against Utah and then 50% of his passes against Washington State. Two pretty good defenses. But now he's going to be playing in the Okay, I got to give Rice Eccles its credit. So I'll say second hardest environment.
Yeah, for sure.
He'll step in. He'll step in this season, and his offense scored a grand total of 7 points at Rice Eccles Stadium. It was tough for him, and it's going to be tough for him at Research Stadium. It's going to be loud. They're going to be. I think the Oregon State defense is going to be super aggressive because they got to get in his face. They got to get him to see things and be confused about what he's seeing down the field.
For sure,
and it's been evident in these conference games. He's thrown a pick six in each of his 2 conference games, each of 2 so far. So he hasn't been great at protecting the football. And on top of that, UCLA is not. They're not elite throwing the ball. They're not elite running the ball. They just don't have many strengths on offense. So that leads you to, okay, so which strength then on the other side of the ball is going to win this game? UCLA, in every game this season, the most points they've given up so far this season is 14 points. Against the pass, against the run, they are excellent on defense. By the way, fun fact, they have the 2 highest graded edge guys in the Pac-12 by PFF, the top 2. And if we think back to when the Beavers played Washington State, it was big that they had to stonewall Brenden Jackson and Ron Stone Jr.
Right.
They didn't. Not good. Not well enough.
Right.
And DJ got pressure in his face. Yeah, these guys are better. DJ got pressure in his face. He looked a little rattled. He was erratic with the football. Then that's similar to Utah, but the Beavers were able to take advantage of a bad quarterback on the other side and eke out that win, get a couple of plays or 2 from Silas Bolden. I think that's what this game's going to come down to. I mean, the Beavers need to make a play or 2 on offense, just a play or 2 against this UCLA defense, and then you need to make Dante Moore's life a living hell. And then I think you come out of this with a victory. I don't think it needs to be flashy. I don't think you need to hit a certain benchmark running the football. I think the Beavers are probably going to struggle, similar to what they did against Utah running the football. They're not going to hit their season mark on the ground. But they make some plays. They execute. They don't turn the ball over. I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, a lot of good points that you hit on. Talking about UCLA's rushing offense, that's something I'm keeping an eye on this game because, like I said, Cal got way more rushing yards than I would have expected them to a week ago, and that was way above where Oregon State's, marks were. And I look at this matchup and UCLA running back Carson Steele, TJ. He had 30 carries last week against the Cougars for 141 yards. No touchdowns. I get it, 4.7 yards per carry. But I imagine, you talked about the running. If I'm Chip Kelly, I'm definitely going to be looking to expose that Oregon State run defense in the same way that it was exposed against Cal. And again, like you said, part of it's missed tackling, maybe not exposed, that's the right word. But regardless, the yards were still allowed. And then try to work Dante Moore in a little bit and not put as much pressure on his young quarterback early on. So if going off what you said, if Oregon State can get back to the run defense that we saw against Utah and the run defense we've come to expect, and then pin their ears back and be able to put pressure on a young quarterback, I like that matchup, and I like, it benefiting Oregon State in that regard. Again, you look at it, Oregon State and UCLA, very similar offensively teams. UCLA, averages, 258 through the air. Oregon State's 245. And then they're both about 200 yards each on the ground. So very similar offenses in this one. And, offenses that, like you said, UCLA struggled to score, but I think they've still had, playmakers and guys capable of getting yards. And then defensively, I give UCLA's defense the nod. Just like going into that game against Oregon State with Utah, I was like, Utah has a better defense than Oregon State, and Oregon State was able to flip that narrative after that game. So, again, if this game was down in the Rose Bowl, I think it'd be a lot more of a pick 'em, and I'd maybe even give UCLA a 1 or 2 point favorite. But the fact that Oregon State's going to be at home, the fact they're going to be playing a 18-year-old quarterback at Research Stadium, and again, I believe it's supposed to be maybe a little drizzly. I saw a few different forecasts, not supposed to be particularly cold, but some rain maybe in the forecast for this weekend. That would obviously further deter a young quarterback, playing in conditions. So I think if Oregon State's, defense can stop the run or at least limit it, that will go for everything in this matchup. So I think you have to get off what you allowed last week and then, force the action there. And then conversely, offensively, I think running the ball is going to be tough, TJ. I mean, you think back to that game against Utah, how Oregon State, Damian Martinez was able to get his longest run and his rushing touchdown against the Utes all on that first offensive drive before Utah then made it really, really tough for the Beavers to run the ball from there out. I mean, again, Deshaun Fenwick had 1 yard rushing against Utah. So it was, real, Oregon State was able to get a little bit of traction while Utah was kind of bending a little bit. UCLA, as I look at it, 65 yards rushing on the ground per game, TJ. That's going to be tough, even with, being at home. So I think Oregon State's offensive line, the status of Talise Fuago is going to be huge. The onus will be on them to open up holes to start that run game, because if UCLA shuts down Oregon State's run game, we've seen DJ be able to make plays now. We've seen it. He's had a game where you've had to, go with his arm to have you go win a game. But the thing that I'm curious about is if UCLA, with those rushers that you mentioned, can pin their ears back and come after DJ if Oregon State can't run the ball, if Oregon State would be able to find anything offensively.
Well, they'll have to. They want to win this game. I think it's as simple as that. You cannot let the UCLA defense win this matchup. You can't, right, because then that negates the advantage you have at home. You can't let that defense travel.
Agreed.
You can't shed away the advantage of facing a young quarterback at home by letting the opposing defense swarm you. In the time I have been here covering Oregon State football since the start of the 2021 season, I haven't seen a team come in here and shut down this Oregon State offense on defense, and I'm sure don't expect it to start on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting matchup. And again, 5 o'clock, Reser Stadium, Fox, if you can't catch it in person. But I expect Reser to be very full. I believe it's a sellout for this weekend. TJ, correct me if I'm wrong there, but 99% sure it's a sellout for this matchup. So it's going to be raucous environment at Reser. And the last game we mentioned before the bye week, so I imagine fans are going to be getting out there looking to cheer on the Beavs. But nevertheless, stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com. We will continue to have coverage leading up to this matchup. TJ, Dylan, and I will give our predictions. We'll also have the injury report. We'll have a closer look at UCLA, a whole bunch more stuff leading into this matchup with the Bruins. So that'll go ahead and wrap up this edition of the podcast. Make sure to stay locked to BeaversEdge.com for everything leading up to the matchup, and even in-game. Join our in-game chat and discussion as we'll be providing updates on the damn board. You can talk to me, talk to TJ, talk to Keenan, anybody that we're going to have there at the game on Saturday. So it's going to be a fun matchup and one we're excited to bring you guys coverage of. Big thanks to TJ Mathewson for joining me on this edition of the podcast. TJ, you will be off next week. It's your turn to go on vacation this next week. We'll see you back in 2 weeks here on the Edge Pod, man. Have fun.
Sounds good.
And make sure to stay locked. TJ and I will be at Reser this Saturday before he heads off on his trip as well. So again, big thanks to everyone for listening to this edition of the Edge Podcast.